This is the story of Noah Bennett and his wife Clara Bennett. They had built their life the way most people build things they intend to keep. Carefully, with attention to the load-bearing walls, less attention to the small cracks forming quietly in the corners. Noah loved Clara with the kind of love that had grown practical over 7 years, dependable the way a well-worn coat is dependable, and he mistook that dependability for proof that nothing was wrong. Clara had her own silence, the kind that accumulates in a person who has learned to swallow her needs before they become requests. Because requests can be refused, and refusals carry their own particular weight. Between them lived a tenderness that was genuine and a distance that neither of them had named. And then Judith came, not like a storm, because storms are obvious, but like a slow drop in barometric pressure, the kind you feel in your joints before you understand what it means. The coffee maker finished its cycle at 6:52 every morning, and Noah had come to measure his life in that sound. He would hear it from the bedroom, already half-dressed. And by the time he came downstairs, Clara would be at the kitchen table with her mug and her phone and the particular quality of morning quiet she wore like a second skin. They had a rhythm. It wasn't romantic, but it was real, the kind of rhythm that sustains people through the ordinary decades of a life shared. He would kiss the top of her head. She would tilt slightly toward him without looking up. He would pour his coffee, check the weather, ask if she needed anything from the store on his way home. "I'll figure it out," she usually said. He had long stopped parsing whether that meant yes or no. Noah worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of work that required a specific tolerance for invisible stress, the forces inside things that couldn't be seen but could, if miscalculated, cause collapse. He liked to think he brought that same precision home. He budgeted carefully, fixed what broke, planned the vacations Clara mentioned wanting, even if she never seemed entirely present on them. He was not an expressive man, but he was consistent, and he had always believed consistency was a form of love. Clara taught high school English 3 days a week and spent the other 2 on her freelance editing work. She was good with language in the way some people are good with music. Intuitively, almost involuntarily, she noticed when words didn't fit, when sentences were carrying more than they could hold. She was less good at applying this skill to her own life. There were things she felt that she had never found the right container for, and over the years they had simply settled somewhere low in her chest, quiet and unexamined. Her mother, Judith Clark, visited on the first Sunday of every month. These visits had their own architecture. Judith would arrive with something, a jar of homemade preserves, a magazine she thought Clara would enjoy. Once a throw pillow that Clara had quietly relocated to the guest room. She would sit at the kitchen table where Clara had sat that morning, and she would ask questions that sounded like curiosity but functioned more like audits. How is work? How is the house? How is Noah treating you? That last one, always. How is Noah treating you? Not how are you and Noah? Not how is Noah? The phrasing was so consistent that Noah had begun to hear it as a kind of embedded argument, a grammatical suggestion that Noah was something that happened to Clara rather than someone who lived alongside her. He never said this aloud. It felt ungenerous. On the Sunday that would later mark the before, Judith had come with a lemon cake and a warmth that seemed slightly calibrated. She embraced Noah at the door, which she did not always do. She complimented the kitchen, which she had complimented before in the tone one uses for a child's mediocre drawing. She sat with them for 2 hours, and the conversation was pleasant and surface level and entirely unremarkable. But at the door, leaving, she held Clara's hand a moment longer than usual. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said. "I just want you to know, whatever you need, whatever happens, I'm always your first call." Clara smiled. "Nothing's happening, Mom." "Of course not." Judith squeezed her hand once and released it. "I just like to say it." Noah watched from the hallway. Something moved through him. Not suspicion exactly, more like the professional instinct he brought to buildings, the sense that somewhere in the structure, weight was being distributed in a way that hadn't been accounted for. He said nothing about it. He went to do the dishes. Clara stood at the front window a moment longer than necessary, watching her mother's car pull away. and the look on her face was not the look of a woman receiving ordinary maternal reassurance. It was something quieter than that, something already half decided. Noah didn't see it. He was running water. It began as a texture. That was the only word Noah could find for it, later when he tried to reconstruct the timeline. Not a behavior exactly. Not an event. A texture, the way certain surfaces feel different before rain, when the humidity has already changed but the sky still looks clear. Clara was present. She still sat across from him at dinner, still answered his questions, still laughed at things that warranted laughing at. But there was something behind her eyes that had shifted, some inner orientation that was no longer quite pointed in his direction. He noticed it the way you notice a painting has been moved slightly on the wall, not because the painting is wrong, but because the light falls differently now, and something in you registers the difference before your mind catches up. He told himself it was stress. Her editing workload had increased. One of her students was going through something difficult. These things were true. He had confirmed them with her directly, and she had offered them without defensiveness. He held them as explanation, but he started paying attention in a different way. He noticed that she took longer to respond to his texts. Not dramatically, not in a way that would survive being named aloud, but by 20 minutes where once it would have been 5. He noticed she had started closing the laptop when he entered the room, which she had never done before, and when he asked about it once, she said she was just in the middle of something, and her tone was level, and there was absolutely nothing to hold on to. He noticed she had started going to bed earlier, and when he came upstairs, she was always on her side, facing the window. And the particular stillness of her body was the stillness of someone who is pretending to be closer to sleep than they are. He was not an intuitive man. He worked with numbers, with load calculations, with things that could be verified and measured. What he felt now was not something he could verify, which made him distrust it. He began to suspect himself of paranoia, of projection, of the ordinary anxiety of a man who had perhaps confused consistency for connection and was now too late, feeling the gap. It was a Wednesday evening when the fourth wall cracked. They were sitting in the living room after dinner, not quite together. Clara on the armchair with a book she wasn't quite reading, Noah on the couch with a project outline he wasn't quite reviewing. The television was off. The room was doing that thing rooms do when two people are in them, but not with each other. Clara lowered her book, looked at him. There was something in her face that seemed about to become something real. "Noah," she said. "Yeah." She paused. Her eyes moved to some middle distance, slightly past him, slightly past the wall, to somewhere that wasn't quite in the room. Her expression went briefly, inexplicably odd, as though she had just become aware of something peripheral and couldn't account for it. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I feel like, maybe like this story or subscribe or something." Noah looked at her. "What?" She blinked, shook her head, seemed to return to herself, faintly unsettled, the way you feel after a thought you can't quite retrieve. "I don't know what I was going to say. You said it sounded like you were talking to someone." "I was talking to you." "Okay." She looked back at her book. He looked back at her papers. The moment passed, and neither of them mentioned it again, but it left a faint static in the room, the feeling of something having almost surfaced before being pulled back down. 2 days later, he found the first thread. He wasn't looking for it. That was the part that would stay with him. He wasn't looking. He had picked up her phone to check the time because his watch was in the other room, and the screen woke to a message thread she had not closed. The contact name was simply Mom. The message visible on screen, the last in a short exchange, read, "Just make sure you look at them carefully. I want you to see it clearly before you do anything." He set the phone down exactly as he had picked it up. He stood in the kitchen for a long time. See what clearly? Do anything about what? He thought about asking her. He built the question in his mind several different ways, and every version of it sounded like accusation. And accusation was a door that, once opened, could not be unopened. He needed to understand what he was looking at before he named it. He knew this with the same certainty he brought to structural analysis. You don't condemn a building before you understand where the stress is actually coming from. He went to bed. He lay beside Clara's deliberate stillness, and he looked at the ceiling and he felt something cold and precise beginning to form in the center of his chest. Not panic, not rage, a question that needed an answer. Noah was not the kind of person who went looking for disaster. He was the kind of person who, upon discovering an anomaly in a load calculation, would re-examine every step of the process before accepting that something was wrong. It was temperamental, not strategic. He had simply never trusted his first interpretation of anything, including his own feelings. So over the following days, he watched, not obsessively. He was aware of the line between attention and surveillance, and he had no intention of crossing it. But he paid a different quality of attention than he had before. He listened to the silences in their conversations. He noticed what Clara reached for and what she pulled back from. He observed with the quiet precision of someone who had spent a career reading invisible forces, the particular way she had begun to look at him. Not with anger, not with coldness, but with a kind of preemptive grief that he recognized distantly as the expression of someone who has already made a decision and is now only waiting for the right moment to implement it. One evening she left her email open on the laptop while she was in the shower. He sat down across the room and told himself he would not look. He made it 40 seconds. The email was from her mother, sent 4 days ago. It contained 2 attachments and a message that read, in its entirety, "Clara, I'm so sorry to send you these. I kept hoping I was wrong. I thought you deserved to know." He opened the attachments. The first was a photograph. It showed Noah, clearly him, recognizably him, with his arm around a woman Noah did not recognize, in a restaurant Noah did not recognize, in what appeared to be an intimate context. The second was a screenshot of a text conversation between a number labeled Noah and this same woman. The messages explicit enough to leave no interpretive room. He sat with these images for a long time. He was not thinking what Judith had intended him to think. He was thinking the way he always thought when something didn't add up, systematically, carefully, starting from what he knew with certainty. What he knew? He had not taken that photograph. He had not sent those messages. He did not know that woman. What he examined, the photograph first. The lighting was wrong in a way that was subtle but specific. The shadow angles didn't match between his figure and the background, a sign of composite editing that a non-technical eye would not catch, but that he, who worked with spatial and structural data, recognized. The restaurant in the background was slightly blurred, just enough to prevent verification. His arm around the woman was at an angle that could have been lifted from any number of photos. He thought of Christmas parties, client dinners, the dozen occasions where he stood with his arm around someone for a camera. The text messages, the number did not match his contact information in Clara's own phone, which he had now carefully checked. A different carrier's formatting, timestamps that showed a call duration inconsistent with Clara's account of his whereabouts on those dates. He went back through it a second time, a third. The evidence looked real. It was designed to look real. It was designed by someone who knew Clara well enough to know how she received information, not through confrontation, but through quiet accumulation. Someone who knew that Clara, once she began to believe something, would retreat into herself rather than ask directly. Someone who had, perhaps, been architecting this retreat for some time. He thought about Judith's hand on Clara's arm at the door. "Whatever you need. Whatever happens. I'm always your first call." He thought about the message on the phone. "I want you to see it clearly before you do anything." He thought about Clara's face over the past 3 weeks, and the particular shape of her grief. Not the grief of betrayal exactly, but the grief of confirmation, as though she had been given proof of something she had been prepared to believe. He did not confront Clara that night. He waited. He spent the next several days building a counter case with the same care he brought to everything. Document retrieval, time-stamped records, a quiet conversation with a friend who worked in digital forensics. By the time he had everything he needed, it had been 8 days since he'd found the email. Clara had, by then, started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. It was a Saturday when he called a family dinner. Not dramatic. He framed it as something overdue, a chance to bring people together. Clara looked at him with something cautious moving behind her eyes, but agreed. Judith arrived with lemon cake again, which struck him as either oblivious or theatrical. They sat at the dining table. The conversation was ordinary for 17 minutes. Then Noah said quietly, "I want to talk about the photographs." Judith's hand stilled on her fork. Clara looked up. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He laid everything on the table with the methodical calm of someone presenting a structural report. The composite errors in the photograph, the phone number discrepancy, the forensic analysis confirming edited metadata, the original source image he had located from a company event 3 years prior, his arm around a colleague named Denise during the annual winter party, cropped and recontextualized and placed in a fabricated setting. He showed Clara the timeline. He showed her the original. He turned to Judith and said simply, "I'd like to understand why." The room went very quiet. Judith's face moved through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, something that tried to be indignation and didn't quite arrive. "Noah, I'm not asking you to defend it," he said. "I'm asking you to be honest with your daughter. That's all." Clara had not moved. She was looking at the original photograph, at Denise, whom she actually knew, whom she had met at a company event 3 years ago. And the expression on her face was not one of relief. It was something more complicated than that. Something that had to do not only with what her mother had done, but with how readily she had believed it. The weeks after that dinner had a particular quality that Noah had not anticipated. He had expected, somewhere in his private imaginings, that exposure would function like resolution, that the truth once named would reorganize everything, that Clara would understand and understanding would restore them. He had underestimated how much the human psyche resists reorganization even when the facts demand it. Judith did not apologize. Not directly, not cleanly, she cried, which was not the same thing. She said things like, "I was only trying to protect you, and I never thought it would go this far. And you know how worried I've always been." And these things were not lies exactly, but they were also not accountability. She left that evening without resolving anything, and in the months that followed, she and Clara entered a period of fraught, careful contact that involved many phone calls Clara took in the other room. Noah did not press Clara about those calls. That too was a form of patience, and it cost him more than he showed. What surprised him was the quality of Clara's silence in the aftermath. He had expected her anger to shift, to redirect itself from him to its appropriate object. What he got instead was something more interior. Clara moved through the following weeks in a kind of self-interrogation that she did not share with him, and he could see it the way. He could see invisible stress in a structure, not directly, but in the effects. She was quieter than before. She picked up her work and put it down again. She would sometimes begin a sentence and let it dissolve before it arrived anywhere. He understood eventually that she was not only processing what her mother had done, she was processing what it meant that she had believed it so readily, that the evidence had landed so cleanly, had fit so neatly into a shape she had apparently been carrying around already. The shape of a man who might, in some version of her life, betray her. She was examining what it meant that she had spent 3 weeks pulling away from him without asking a single direct question. She was sitting with the portrait of herself that the situation had produced, and it was not entirely comfortable. Noah moved through this period with care. He was not by nature a patient man in emotional matters. He was patient in his work because work rewarded patience. But intimacy had always felt to him like territory with different rules, territory where waiting felt like abandonment. He made himself wait anyway. He took on 2 new projects at work and came home tired in a way that had nothing to do with avoidance. He cooked on weekends, which was something he had let slide over the years. He did not declare these gestures. He made them without announcement, which was the only way he knew to make them without turning them into leverage. There was an evening in the 9th week when Clara came and sat beside him on the couch, not across from him, beside him, and leaned her head back and closed her eyes and said, "I keep trying to figure out what I was so ready to believe." He looked at her profile, and, "I think I'd gotten used to feeling like you were managing me rather than being with me." She opened her eyes. "I'm not saying that justifies anything." "No," he agreed. I'm saying I think I was already halfway somewhere else. She just handed me a map. He thought about this for a long time. And where are you now? She turned her head to look at him. Her face was tired and unguarded, which was, he realized, something he had not seen in quite some time. I don't know yet. It was not a reassurance. He didn't take it as one, but it was, he thought, the first honest thing she had said to him in months, that hadn't been shaped by some other agenda, her mother's, her own fear, her uncertainty about what she was allowed to feel. He nodded. They sat there for a while, in a silence that was different from the silence of the preceding months. Not comfortable exactly, but real. Outside, the evening was doing its ordinary work. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was mowing a lawn. A car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Noah noticed all of it, and he sat very still, and he let the moment be what it was. Incomplete, inconclusive, and, for the first time in a long time, not managed. Spring came in the way spring always comes. Not all at once, but in accumulations, small warmths built on each other until one morning you notice the light has changed. Clara was making tea when Noah came downstairs. She didn't look up immediately, but she was aware of him in the room. He could tell by the slight shift in how she held herself, the orientation of her body. They had relearned this awareness of each other over the past months. The physical grammar of two people who had been near strangers to each other for a while and were now not returned. Not restored, but in the process of becoming something that might hold. There's extra water in the kettle, she said. Thanks. He poured his coffee, stood at the counter. The morning light came through the window above the sink and moved across the kitchen floor in a slow rectangle. My mother called, Clara said. She was looking at her mug. She wants to have dinner, the three of us. Noah was quiet for a moment. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. Okay. I'm not ready, she added. I don't know if I'll get there. He understood that she was telling him several things at once, that she was still managing the Judith question, that she was not asking him to manage it for her, that she was accounting for his presence in the decision even if she was making the decision herself. This was different from how she had operated before. Before, she had managed things privately and presented him with outcomes. Now she was doing something harder, which was thinking out loud, which required trusting him to sit with unresolved things without flinching. He was trying to be worse that trust. Whatever you decide, he said, I'll follow your lead. She nodded, sipped her tea. He was almost finished with his coffee when she said, I'd been thinking about that thing I said, a few months ago, in the living room. He looked at her. I said something strange, she said. About subscribing or something. I don't even know what I meant. I didn't either. I think I was. She paused, looked at the middle distance again, as she had that evening, though this time with something more like fruitful awareness. I think I was aware, for just a second, that the whole thing was being watched, that we were in the middle of something that had a shape to it, and it made me want to, I don't know, acknowledge it somehow. He thought about this. Were you scared? I think I was. Yeah. He said nothing. She said nothing. The morning moved around them. She washed her mug, dried her hands, picked up her bag from the chair where she always left it, with her keys and her wallet and her library card tucked into the front pocket. At the door, she stopped and turned. She looked at him with an expression he had seen rarely in their life together. Not love exactly, not happiness, but something more durable than either. The look of someone who has chosen, clearly and without drama, to remain. I'm going to be home by 6, she said. I'll make something, he said. She left. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the quiet her absence made, which was different now from the silence of months ago. That silence had been the silence of accumulation, of unspoken things banking up against the walls. This was simply the ordinary quiet of a house between the people who lived in it. He thought about what she had said, about feeling managed. He thought about the years in which he had tended their life as though it were an engineering problem. Identify the weakness, shore up the foundation, maintain the load-bearing elements. He had not been wrong to want stability. But stability and presence were not the same thing. and he had confused them for a long time. He rinsed his mug, set it on the drying rack. Through the window, the rectangle of morning light had moved across the floor and reached the opposite wall. In an hour it would be gone, replaced by whatever the rest of the day brought. He watched it for a moment in the way you watch something you have started, finally to see. Then he went to get ready. The house held its breath around him, ordinary, imperfect, continuing.